Well, welcome to this. My job here today is to give you some description of the market opportunities that exist in Brazil at this particular moment in time. I'm very pleased to see that there are people here that are interested in this market, and I think that there's very good reason to be interested. So I think hopefully this will prove to be of value to you. When I've learned how to use the board. Okay, for those of you will obviously instantly recognize Rio and the Chrysler Dilma together with Sugarloaf Mountain. So for those of you that may not be familiar with, intimately familiar with Brazil, then you'll know that Rio de Janeiro will obviously now be the home of the upcoming Olympics. It has been the center of economic growth, not just within Brazil, but actually in Sao Paulo, in South America as a whole, although of course it ranks competitively alongside Sao Paulo in terms of economic impact within the country. And apart from anything else, it's a hell of a good place to visit. It is a wonderful city that is multicultural, dynamic, interesting, and with the best beach in the world. So what isn't there to like about it? I kind of start off by saying, what do we know? What do we know at the moment about Brazil? We read things, we discuss things, we maybe have some level of contact with the country. So what I've done, I've picked off a few headlines which hopefully give some description of Brazil and the features which exist at the moment. So let's just run through this. And what I also do is take these word descriptions and relate it to where does the business opportunity lie? What does this tell us about where the business opportunities are within the country? But first of all, we talk with Dilma Rousseff. Is there anybody in the room who wouldn't know who Dilma Rousseff is? Okay, there's at least one person. Dilma Rousseff is the president of Brazil currently. She represents a political party which is very much leaning to the left. In fact, Dilma herself was a Marxist terrorist in her early days, her description. But she has since then become president of the country, having been re-elected 2 years ago on a very, very narrow majority. Across the country, probably only a 1% majority. So her hold on power is quite thin. And this signifies some of the issues which exist within the country. Now, I predicted, a few months ago, that there was a very strong likelihood that Dilma Rousseff would be lighting the Olympic candle from her prison cell. She isn't there yet. She's managing to keep in office, although there have been impeachment proceedings commenced against her, although that has now been suspended by another political maneuver. The story here really is that Dilma Rousseff represents turmoil in the country as far as the political stability is concerned. And this, therefore, from a business perspective, obviously represents something of an issue, because the turmoil which exists around her relates specifically to the economy. Her role has been to increase the support and wealth of the lower classes within the society, hence through very expensive social welfare programs, which of course now have to be paid for. And regrettably, the oil value isn't there to do it. So this is causing unrest. And we'll just have to await events and see if Dilma manages to stay out of prison by the time the Olympics start. In the case of Samba, the reason I mention Samba is because Samba obviously is inherently linked against Carnival. And Carnival in Brazil is a significant cultural event. Most of us from here in the UK would view it as a good place for a holiday and a good time to celebrate in the city. In the case of within Rio, particularly where the carnival is very strong, it is a huge cultural, creative event. And it therefore opens doors for any company that works within the creative industry. whether it's design or music, video, and any of those media activities are opened through Samba and Carnival. In fact, the statistics often show there is a higher degree of activity in Samba in Brazil than there is in football. So that gives you an indication of just how major it is. Now, Petrobras, many of you will know, is the Brazilian state oil company, which is, of course, inherently linked to Dilma Rousseff, because Dilma was president or chairman of Petrobras at the time when there has been structural and deep levels of corruption and bribery. And this is where Dilma is associated with it. Now, it's a question of how, from a UK business perspective, we view that. We either look at it and say, well, the country's rotten. It is beyond hope. Or we look at it and say, well, actually, the corruption which exists is not isolated to Brazil. It is a global issue. The factor here is that Brazil, through the issues within Petrobras, is doing something about it. And that cannot be said about some of the other countries around the world. So we can therefore view it positively. And Petrobras is being shaken out. And a lot of these issues are being taken away, which is very good. And then inevitably, at some future point in time, maybe not too far away, oil prices are going to escalate again, and maybe returning somewhere near to where they were, and Petrobras will become a major significant player. So consequently, the oil industry in Brazil continues to represent a significant market sector as far as UK companies are concerned. Any business which operates in the oil industry and its associated activities will continue to regard Brazil as a target market, and in fact should do. And many of the issues at the moment in terms of the restriction of the oil industry in Brazil are temporary. So our advice is that businesses that operate within that sector should be doing their groundwork now in terms of establishing their trading route, their trading partnerships, in order that they can capitalize upon the industry when it resumes to where it was. The next one is 7-1. Who in the room knows what 7-1 represents? Football fan, you see, football fan. 7-1 is another football fan. 7-1 is the score that Brazil was smashed by Germany in the World Cup. Now, okay, it's just a sporting event, World Cup. It has no consequence, other than the fact that 7-1 showed the Brazilians what global disgrace looked like. This was a great tragedy for the local sporting industry within Brazil. And we noticed, particularly in planning for the Olympics, the fact was that the World Cup ended in a 7-1 disgrace. The Brazilians then looked at it and said, crikey, what happens if we screw up the Olympics? This is bad enough, but the Olympics could be a global disgrace that we will never recover from. And because of that, they had the very good sense to turn to the UK and say, well, 2012 was a huge success, so let's get some of that success. And as a consequence of that, a large number of UK businesses have capitalized on that opportunity and are supplying the 2016 Olympics in Rio. So that's a key moment in the development of this country. I would also say, going back to the situation with Dilma Rousseff, which is also worth bearing in mind, that politically the country is very young. It has only been a democracy for just over 30 years, which means that it's going through a learning process. And we have to recognize that and work with it in terms of our business planning within the country. The next heading is ethanol. Many of you may know that ethanol remains to be a significant industry within the country. The percentage of cars which are driven on ethanol as a product of sugarcane remains to be very high. So the automotive industry, this represents a unique business opportunity to supply for the ethanol market within automotive within the country. Amazonas in Manaus is a center within Brazil, which some of you will be familiar with. I mention it because Manaus represents, there is a free port zone within Manaus and can sometimes represent a route into the country. So it's a worthwhile feature to know about. The main one, though, the next one I'll come on to, which is local content. In every business model which companies in the UK adopt for trading in Brazil, they have to address the issue of local content. Local content is determined and has a direct implication against taxation. So consequently, a UK company that is looking to export into the Brazilian market in whole, in other words, producing in any other country in the world or the UK and shipping into Brazil, will experience eye-watering levels of taxation. The way of minimizing that in terms of building the business model is to partner with local Brazilian companies that can, in some way and part, complete part of the service or product. Now, the percentages can be worked upon, but in very broad terms, a product being shipped into Brazil from the UK would carry a taxation burden of somewhere between 65 to 80% on top of the shipping value. If that is transferred into local content, then that taxation can be dropped to 20%. So it's very much a question of looking at the business model and how it's designed around local content. The next one is Barra da Tijuca, which is the location for the Olympic Games. Now, as far as we can tell, the Brazilians are well placed for the Olympic Games. It's most of the stadiums are built, not without loss of life, I have to say, and not without some issues which have surrounded it in terms of corruption. But nonetheless, they are on course. And there's no doubt at all, as with every other country in the world, that the Olympics will be a marvellous success, because they always are. But I think especially in Brazil, because nobody throws a party like the Brazilians. And I think we're going to see that in the event itself. Looking to the longer term, what I can say is that the post-Olympic regeneration is not on course. And I think that the legacy of the Olympics, which was such a large feature of London 2012, has not been addressed in the same way in Brazil. And therefore, going after post-Olympic, there will be major business opportunities in terms of putting those infrastructure improvements, completing the projects and turning the Olympic venues into the long-term legacy that they should be. The final one is favelas. Favelas, many of you will know, are the lower income areas, particularly in Rio. They're worth mentioning because, of course, they do represent a significant proportion of the population of the country who live in, I would choose not to refer to it as slum housing, certainly not in Indian terms, but as low-grade, unplanned housing development, because most of it was land grab by agricultural workers coming into the city, and they built the house where they liked the view. And the view is awesome. So my judgment is that favelas are sat on probably the most valuable real estate land in the world. And I consider that this is going to be an opportunity which is going to be grabbed at some time, because the location of the favelas, looking out particularly over Rio, is absolutely unrivaled. And before long, I can see there's a probability of somebody picking up on that. Okay. So that, again, that provides a main business opportunity. I put this up because if there's anything which tells me what Brazilian passion looks like, this is it. This was a result of 7-1. And it is painful to the Brazilian culture, the Brazilian temperament to see failure. But the opportunities in this case in Sao Paulo are absolutely impossible to ignore. And let me give you just a few kind of what I've called off as killer facts for the country. You can see that the Brazilian oil discoveries are still hugely significant. 50% of the world global finds was coming from Brazil in 2010. Those reserves remain offshore in the salt areas and therefore are there to be exploited. The GDP of Brazil absolutely swamps the whole of Latin America. So it is the place to be for business volume. The economy will be stronger than Germany's by 2020, and our prediction is that that will be the case even accepting the current recessional impact which has existed. You can see the level of agricultural activity purely in the case of coffee. Brazil still represents the basket of Latin America and of the world in terms of agricultural production. So there are major opportunities for UK companies in the agricultural industry. But the infrastructure is awful. And the traffic jams in Rio and Sao Paulo are completely appalling. And therefore it has an impact. So the infrastructure isn't keeping up with the growth and of the economy. And therefore this will represent structural investment in time to come. In a positive note, as far as Dilma Rousseff's legacy is concerned, she has introduced policies which have brought 21 million people out of poverty and into tax-paying situations within the country. And this has had a major impact on the spending power and the buying power of the market quite extensively. Obviously linked to that has been the program of pacification, which some of you will know is the activities which have been taken to bring the favelas into law-abiding communities. At the moment, they're about 50% through the program of pacification as far as the favelas are concerned. But it does mean that those favelas which are taken into state control and where the police can operate, where people can live safely, also brings those people into the tax-paying community. So it's a great development. But taxation is the one issue which most UK businesses become absolutely terrified of. And we've coined this phrase that like football, the British invented taxation and bureaucracies, and the Brazilians made a better job of it. And I think that is still very much the case. So any of the businesses going into the country will have to learn to handle the issue of taxation and bureaucracy. In that sense, you obviously need to use the services of UKTI or other country specialists who can help you through that particular process. It's very much a question of risk and business modeling. The business model is, what am I taking into the country? How much local content can I secure? What port do I take the goods in through? How much interstate transportation does that involve? What does that look like in terms of interstate taxation and other consequences associated with it? And this is why, in the majority of cases, UK businesses will partner with a local organisation that can handle that issue for them with the kind of knowledge and efficiency which they would have. These are the barriers, these are the issues that we see as the most frequently quoted reasons why people, UK businesses, choose not to trade with Brazil. First of all, IP. Brazil runs its own IP system. It does not recognise the UK IP, or indeed it doesn't recognise the Madrid Convention, and therefore intellectual property is at risk in the country, theoretically. The reason I say theoretically is because I do not, from my experience, consider the Brazilians to be copiers. They tend not to take an idea and produce it themselves. They tend to prefer to trade it. So that means that IP is maybe not quite so critical. Having said that, you can adopt an IP process in the country, but it will take, can take up to 3 years to become fully IP protected. So it is a barrier. So as I said earlier, the taxes and tariffs can put anything between 65 to 80% in costs. That is inevitably, to most UK businesses, almost an abhorrent situation. That sort of premium is being put onto their goods. However, I will, and I can quote some instances of this, turn it into a positive. There are many instances where this level of taxation turns a product which to us would be middle market into a premium product. And that premium product at the price that it sells in Brazil to the correct market makes it more attractive. I've used in conversation today one particular incident that I can quote where I went into a deli in Sao Paulo and the side wall was racked with British beer. Shepherd Neame was there, Badger Ales and others. They were selling on the shelf for the equivalent of £15 a bottle, and it was flying off the shelf. And I spoke to the shop owner. She said, we can't sell enough of it. And below the beer was Tyrrell's crisps. You would not pay what they were paying for Tyrrell's crisps. But it was because of the fact that it was that expensive, they were selling more of it. So the local infrastructure is inadequate, and there are major distribution problems. This could have an impact, particularly if you are transporting perishable goods. The port system can be a bit archaic. Goods can end up being held in port for sometimes difficult to fathom reasons. So perishable goods need to be very carefully considered. The country has an active and aggressive legal profession. There are more lawyers in Sao Paulo than there are in the whole of the UK. And they are all looking for an opportunity to make some money. And therefore they can work within the legal system to do that. So they do deal harshly with businesses that don't follow the regulations. This is particularly critical with importation and shipping, where goods can be compounded at the port simply because a document has not been compiled properly. So you need to use a professional organization to do that for you. It's not a good idea to learn that on the job. Bribery and corruption exists, as we know. It's not unique to Brazil. It is structural at the governmental and institutional level of the business. But we were having a conversation earlier where we both agreed that actually at the ground roots level, corruption almost doesn't exist. It is only in the government and institutional level. And it is quite big numbers, but we are also recognizing that there is an enormous groundswell within the country against corruption. And one of the plus points is that, first of all, Brazil has its own anti-corruption legislation, which is very strong, very heavily applied. But also, we have an advantage from the UK, because we can step into Brazil and quote our own bribery and corruption legislation as an indication of the culture that we operate in. So to a number of businesses in Brazil, this is an attractive scenario, because they say that we know that we're dealing with people who will not entertain corruption. And you can take that into a positive, and there are ample experiences of where businesses do just that. The crime, which is often quoted in Brazil, is an issue. I have to tell you that the last time I was in Brazil, there was some publicity about some crime in the UK, and a number of Brazilians said to me, I'd never go to that country. So you need to take it in context. You need to take it in relevance. And obviously, to the traveller, you have to be aware. You have to be cautious. Don't walk around the favela with a map, looking to see, to find the local tourist shop. You won't keep your jewellery and money for very long if you do that. But exercising sensible precautions keeps you in a safe environment. The geography of Brazil is quite significant to the UK business, because one of the advantages of trading in Brazil is that the markets are very concentrated. So consequently, seeing the territory of Brazil, you will see that places like Recife at the top right-hand corner, right on the coast, a main import route from Miami, being one of the biggest ports coming into Brazil. So Recife is often a route into Brazil. And then when you come down to Rio de Janeiro and obviously Sao Paulo, they are huge conglomerates. And the percentage, you can see the percentages here of the amount of the population of a country of 240 million people, where almost over half of them are located in the southeast, around Rio and Sao Paulo. So consequently, to a UK business, you can focus on one area. It's like Sao Paulo is a country of its own. So it's quite possible to look at Sao Paulo and say, right, this is the market that we're going to go for. We don't need to worry about the rest of the country. We will focus entirely on Sao Paulo, and that'll give you plenty enough business, particularly where in Sao Paulo, for instance, is the location of Embraer and Odebrecht. So those two huge companies situated in Sao Paulo. So it's quite convenient for UK businesses to focus on that area and not to be overly concerned. You can see how sparsely populated the Amazon region is. So that doesn't necessarily need to come into particularly a business entry strategy. There are reasons why we trade with Brazil, in my opinion, and from the experiences that we've had. One of the reasons is that there are similarities in culture. Obviously, the Portuguese is the spoken language. That was introduced into Brazil from Portugal by the Portuguese royal family that was relocated into Brazil by the British Navy many years ago. So there is quite a cultural similarity between the two countries. First name basis is quite common. We talk about the same thing. We have broadly the same sense of humour. I wouldn't say we have identical. They still are utterly fathomed by British sense of humour. Not surprisingly, really, is it? The dress code is quite similar. So these are areas where, we talk the same language. The differences, though, are quite acute. The differences are that whereas we tend to be quite organised, rigid in our application, maybe even sometimes quite Germanic in the way in which we organise things, this is not a feature in Brazil. Punctuality is not a virtue. I have arrived for meetings in Brazil on time, and people have chuckled and said, "What are you doing here now? This is not..." So there's much more flexibility in the thinking. The meetings will often take longer, and the reasons why they take longer is because Brazilians are naturally outward going. They're naturally talkative. They want to engage verbally with people. And one of the mistakes which British businesses adopt when having business meetings in Brazil is a tendency to interrupt, or a tendency to get over your point of view, or worst of all, to keep looking at your agenda. You have to take a much more flexible approach to the engagements with the company, with the people that you meet, and allow them the space to contribute. And if you do that, then you build the relationship. And the relationship is what the whole trading situation is about. It won't be, I promise you, that nobody will do business in Brazil based on price. They will do it based upon price and relationship. It is the way that people know each other which has much greater implications. Having said that, Brazilians naturally do not like to be negative, so they will not often say no. And there are many British businesses that go into meetings, come out of those meetings utterly convinced they've just done the best deal of their life because of all the positive indications they've been given, and then they never hear from the company again. And it's simply because the natural cultural tendency is not to offend. So this has to be recognised and it has to be worked on. The surprise is that Brazil has a highly efficient financial system. The taxation system through VAT, PAYE equivalent, those kind of payroll taxes is done monthly. It's all done online. It is all very slick, and the whole situation of financial management within the country is very good indeed. The anti-corruption legislation is also very strong. They have advanced use of IT. I cannot tell you how bemused my Brazilian friends are at the sight of British people going into a village hall to put a cross on a piece of paper in an election. It is preposterous to them. Their voting systems are online, income tax returns are online, microinsurance is all online. So they're very adept at online trading, and also from a social media point of view, the country is, the statistics indicate on social media, they're more advanced than we are. And the people are naturally very adaptable, and they are very accustomed to things changing. So they cope with these changes in many ways a lot better than we do. And that's quite a stimulating environment to do business in. And they're also capable of dealing with complex trading, as they are currently at the moment. My friends here who speak Portuguese will tell me what the Portuguese translation is, but there is a word that describes Brazilian way. Am I right?
Sem rascar.
There you are. Did you get that? The Brazilian way is that there's always an answer. You know, whatever the issue, whatever the problem, the Brazilians will find an answer. You know, we'll get around it. We'll get around it. And they do. They're very flexible, very adaptive. So that is something which UK companies can benefit from in terms of building the relationship. So I've tried to give some weighted example of what the challenge is in trading in Brazil. Our view is that winning business, the thing that's of major attraction from the Brazilian market is the volume. Any country of 240 million people, particularly concentrated in the way I've described, is a volume market. So consequently, the aspirations of a UK company can be high. You can set the bar high in terms of the value of business that you can reasonably expect to do. And such things as I've mentioned here, oil industry, Olympics, and especially at the moment healthcare, are areas where the opportunities in numeric terms are huge. However, in terms of balancing the risk against those opportunities, the things that British businesses will find both frustrating and also inhibiting in terms of doing business is, first of all, poor information. Getting to the root of the information that you need can frequently be very difficult. This is often the case for any companies that might be in healthcare. Anybody in healthcare who has had to put their products through Anvisa registration will know that poor information is often the undoing. Lack of discipline, sometimes we find it hard to cope with this sort of flexible approach. And above all, and this is really where UKTI and professional agencies are absolutely vital, is the process of finding reliable partners. Finding somebody that you can trust, that you can do business with, that will represent you in the market, that won't cheat you, that will deliver what they say they're going to do, is the keynote to trading in the country. And it is that process which the company most often is unable to do on its own. It needs significant help. Now, just finishing this presentation by drawing to your attention to the fact that next week UKTI has what we're calling a Latin American Roadshow from Monday to Friday of next week. This is taking place in various venues across the south of the country. This event brings into the UK commercial officers from all Latin American countries. There are, I think, from about 14 or 15 in total, running right away from Cuba through Dominican Republic, Mexico, and then all of Latin America. And it's providing the opportunity for businesses to go along, meet with them on a one-to-one basis, get into a detailed discussion about what you have to offer, what product or service you're looking to take into the market, and you will then get direct advice on how that can be done. Anybody who's interested in this, I would urge you to register quickly because the numbers are being grabbed very quickly. But it is a great event to explore the business opportunities which exist throughout Latin America. And for that, I thank you.